Hey listeners, with fall in full swing, it's the perfect time to refresh your wardrobe with pieces that feel as good as they look. Luckily, Quince makes it easy to look polished, stay warm, and save big without compromising on quality. Quince has all the elevated essentials for fall. Think 100% Mongolian cashmere from $50, washable silk tops and skirts, and perfectly tailored denim, all at prices that feel too good to be true. By partnering directly with ethical top-tier factories, Quince cuts out the middleman to deliver luxury, quality pieces at half the price of similar brands. I've been loving so many of the home goods, including their cozy blankets, such as the organic cotton channel stitch coverlet. It's the perfect addition to warm up your house for the fall, so keep it classic and cozy this fall with long-lasting staples from Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's quince.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. quince.com/POTC.
College is new and hard and different, and it's supposed to be uncomfortable. And so I think really managing the expectations that you can have a wonderful and amazing college experience, and it's going to be hard. And that doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It means that you're actually showing up and being human, and that, being able to ask for support is a life skill and not a crutch.
When you do make mistakes, when things are hard, how do you just give yourself so much self-compassion and kindness and just remind yourself that this is part of the experience and you can be really kind to yourself even if you feel like you messed up.
Make mistakes, fail, seek support when you need it, and know the resources on campus that are available to you, because there are a lot of the time, and not all the students really take advantage of it, and including the counseling centers.
That was Colleen Ehrnstrom, Audrey Gilfillan, and Alison West on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act for Burnout and Act Daily Journal.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Harold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and the author of an upcoming book on developing your confidence and social skills.
From Boston, I'm Dr. Yael Schoengren, faculty at Brown University and author of Work, Parent, Thrive, and an upcoming book about misunderstanding.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hey, everybody. You are about to dive into Debbie's episode on college mental health. And it's Jill here, just reminding you to stay tuned to the end, and you can hear my co-host post chat with Debbie at the end of the episode.
Well, we're here today to talk about college mental health, and I have 3 wonderful experts on this who are joining me. And I'm going to start with an introduction of all 3 of you. Dr. Colleen Ehrnstrom is a licensed clinical psychologist and one of the managers at the Embedded program at the Counseling and Psychiatric Services at the University of Colorado at Boulder. She specializes in acceptance and commitment therapy and enjoys working with college students, supporting their mental health during a critical time of personal and academic development. She's also the co-author of End the Insomnia Struggle, a step-by-step guide to help you get to sleep and stay asleep, which, by the way, we have featured on the podcast before with your co-author, Colleen. And she regularly presents and trains on ACT and behavioral sleep strategies. Dr. Ehrnstrom is dedicated to supporting mental health through evidence-based, mindfulness-informed care. Hello, Colleen. Welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Is it okay if I also mention that we're friends and colleagues, that Colleen and I have known each other for a very long time now, 15 years, I think.
Oh.
Yeah. So happy to finally have you on the podcast. Audrey Gilfillan is a licensed professional counselor and works as an embedded therapist in the College of Engineering and Applied Science at the University of Colorado at Boulder. With a background in academic coaching, career counseling, and college mental health, Audrey specializes in supporting college students as they navigate the intersection of their academic goals and mental health. Welcome, Audrey. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here today.
And Alison West is a licensed professional counselor and addiction specialist who also works as an embedded therapist in the College of Engineering and Applied Science at CU Boulder. Prior to working in higher education, Alison worked in community mental health, providing direct support through ongoing therapy, crisis response, and case management. Alison is passionate about supporting young adults as they navigate the challenges of an ever-changing world. She finds fulfillment in helping professionals bring mental health awareness and practices into their work and academic communities. Welcome, Alison. Great to have you here, too.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And together, Audrey and Alison have co-authored a book called Decompile Your Mind, an engineer's guide to thoughts and emotions. And they co-founded applied wellness initiatives to help educators and managers effectively support mental health and performance in the workplace. So we have a lot to talk about today with all of your fabulous expertise working in, a university setting, supporting mental health, and also all of your books. So we're going to dive right in because we have so much to talk about. And I actually want to start pretty broad. So all three of you are mental health professionals working in this academic setting at CU Boulder, my alma mater. So go CU. And I really hope that this episode will be directly applicable to students, college students, undergraduates, and graduate students. We're going to get into some tips later on in the conversation for supporting mental health, but also to anyone who works in any capacity with this population. So therapists, professors, really anyone who knows and loves college students, including their parents and families. And so I'm hoping that this will be applicable to a number of people. And so just talking about mental health at this particular moment of life in this particular environment, which is in and of itself a big, huge topic. And so to start with, I'm just wondering if you could talk about some of the challenges that people face, why there is a need for mental health professionals like yourselves in this academic environment. Anyone want to start us off here? Audrey?
I'll start off. Yeah, I think for first year college students, it's a huge time of transition. Right? They are making so many changes. They are moving many times to a different state, a different country. They are taking on different classes that have completely different expectations and level of rigor, right? They're maybe going to a school where they don't know anyone, and so they're having to make new friends. And so this college population is such a time of transition. And figuring out how to adapt to a really, really new setting. One of the particular pieces that I notice quite a lot is just adapting to the executive functioning requirements in a college setting. In high school and earlier, right, students are given a ton of structure, right? Like go to this class at this time, and then this class the next hour, and this is when you get to study, and then this is when your sports practice is. And in college, it is so much more open-ended. And so it can be a really hard transition process for students to figure out how do they create their own structure in a way that works for them when it's not coming from an external source.
Yeah. Okay. And Alison?
Yeah, just going off of what Audrey just said, they're learning how to have this newfound autonomy. They're away from their families and caregivers, and they're maybe for the first time exploring what they truly care about, what decisions they can make about their life. Is this major right for me? How much time do I spend with friends versus studying? What does my diet look like when I'm out of my house? There's a lot that they really need to figure out for themselves, and in that learn their values. And not to say that they don't have any of this ahead of time, but I would say college is really a time to become their own person. And a lot of times I've noticed students like to make decisions with their heads. They're kind of afraid of failing or making a mistake or the wrong decision. And it doesn't really work that way. College is definitely also a time of making mistakes. And so I always encourage my clients, if they aren't sure, should I join this club or this club? My advice is always to just pick one of them, doesn't matter which one, and just go for it and try it. And you won't really be able to live your life in your head like that. You really got to experience it.
Oh, I love that, because it's a time in life when I look back and think about mistakes I made and think about that was actually a good time to make some of those mistakes, because, you're trying things out and the stakes are a little bit lower than 20 years down the road. I was just thinking about that, what you said about having more autonomy and freedom. And I just remember when my first year of college in the dining hall, and there were just these giant things of like cereal, and for the first time, people can just eat as many Fruit Loops as they want. And all these people with, like soda and ice cream and Fruit Loops because, maybe their parents probably cooked for them before. And so it's like the freedom is there.
For me, it was the ice cream machine.
Ice cream, yeah. Or like having a hamburger every single night. And after a while, you're like, okay, enough of that. Colleen, did you want to add anything in terms of some of the challenges of this time of life?
What I would add is having, thinking back on my own experience of that autonomy, independence, and launching and figuring out, sort of your community and roommates. And they're doing all of that, but they are also navigating, coming out of the pandemic and having some delays and missing out on years of social engagement. They're dealing with, massive impact of social media in a way that certainly my generation, our generation didn't. And just thinking about the global politics and just adding that and just really recognizing the intensity of it and how it's the same and yet it's not at all the same.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about that a little bit more as the conversation unfolds, because in some ways, looking back, the time that I went to college, which was in the 90s, it feels like such a simpler time in some ways. And so, yeah, you have that layer of all the stressors of the world and the pandemic and everything going on. Do you feel like you've noticed that in the years that you've been in college counseling? Has that stress been present in your work?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So as clinicians, therapists working in this setting, what are some of the major reasons people come in for mental health treatment in the college counseling environment?
Colleen, do you want to start this one?
Okay. Yeah. One of the things that's really impressive about this generation is that I think they're really committed to their health and they see mental health treatment as a part of that self-care. So we have more students than maybe we did in previous generations that are already started some of their mental health work in high school, sometimes even in middle school. And so they come in and they're really, really well versed in sort of how they want to take care of themselves. I think simultaneously, we also see a lot of students who are experiencing, their first major stressors or crises. And it's super interesting because you could have two students that were presenting with really similar distress, anxiety, depression. Maybe they're not eating well, they're not sleeping well, they're, feeling a lot of discomfort. So they look the same, but it's for very fundamentally different reasons. So you might have one of those students who's there because they're failing a class and that's never happened to them before and it's devastating. But then the other one isn't acing the class. And so I think, we've got this level of which they're coming in with distress, but for, really different reasons. And I think that is an important thing to, spend time getting at and understanding. I think in general, we see a lot of distress around, success, perfectionism, motivation, community. It's so important to be accepted, and building out these new communities is so, relevant to where they are in their developmental stages. And it's hard. It's interesting because this generation and in some of the surveys that we've given at CU Boulder and across the country, they're reporting loneliness at an all-time high. And so they're around people and yet still feeling lonely. So managing that engagement, I think, is really common too.
Another piece that I might add that, I've noticed just in the time that I was an undergrad from now is like the stigma of mental health, of mental illness has reduced, right? There's a lot of campaigns and social media normalizing mental health concerns, mental illness. And so a lot of students are much more open to seeking help, compared to when I was a college student. And that's a really, really powerful thing. And at the same time, that sometimes we notice that it can swing to the other end of the spectrum, where they're almost kind of pathologizing normal human struggling and not really kind of being able to discern, hey, this is anxiety because I'm nervous for a test and I care, versus this is, clinically diagnosable anxiety that really needs a professional to jump in. So a lot of times students will come in kind of hearing this language of anxiety, depression, PTSD, and kind of wondering if they might fit one of those criteria. And so that's a lot of times how they come in. And part of our job is to discern, yes, is there a diagnosis that is appropriate and how do we support them? But also, how do we just normalize normal human suffering is a part of that as well.
Oh, the test anxiety is such a good example of that because, of course, if you have a major exam, you're going to feel nervous. And I think to just maybe reassure people, okay, that's normal. That's not anything to be concerned about. Of course, you might need some ways to cope with your nervousness or your anxiety, but that's not necessarily the same thing as, a diagnosable anxiety disorder that's really impacting your functioning.
Absolutely.
Who doesn't have that jittery butterfly feeling, worry right before a big exam?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think a part of that too is the expectations that they had before coming to college. And also I work with graduate students as well, and the expectation they had before starting their research. College is often talked about as like the best years of your life. I think that is often not the case for a lot of people. There's a lot of life to live after that. It can be really great, but it also is more nuanced than that. Especially in the beginning, it can be really challenging to, find your people and get a rhythm with your sleep and all of that. And so I see a lot of clients coming in just feeling like, if this is harder than I thought it would be, what is wrong with me? And again, for us to be able to say, nothing is wrong with you. This is hard. And also, you're not the only one. And what can we do to kind of help you out there?
Yeah, that's such a good point. Do you see a lot of things like eating disorders and substance abuse as well? I remember there being quite a few substances going around back in my day at CU Boulder. Is that something you see a lot of as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
The short answer is yes.
Yep.
Okay. I thought so. Yeah. My PhD was in developmental psych. And actually, I think it's always really important to look at a developmental lens with this. And you've already alluded to this, but there's so much going on at this age, both for undergraduates and also graduate students as well, because they're in this sort of very interesting time of life. I was wondering if you just had any thoughts about some of the developmental things about working with. Probably most of your clients are, I imagine, like young adults, correct?
Yeah, I think this is the stage, right, where they're testing that freedom. They're getting a taste of it more than they got before. So they're adapting to it and figuring out what they like, what's required of them. I love working with this population because they have so much ability and capacity for change, right? There's a lot of neuroplasticity. And so I often find, right, even just like 6 sessions, there can be a dramatic change in growth if a student just kind of reframes one piece or builds one new habit that shifts kind of how they're approaching their wellness.
They're not like so ingrained in their behavior patterns that it's hard to budge, right? Yeah.
Yeah, they're really open and curious to new ways of experiencing the world and how to adapt to struggle, how to cope with struggle. And so I find this group of students to be really, really motivated and receptive to the work that we do in therapy.
Yeah, I would add to that, developmentally, it's such a critical and fascinating time where we are developing both inward and outward at the same time. So this inward of identity of who do I want to be? What do I care about? But then also, this outward, how desperately we care about, what people think about us and how we look and that world as well. I also love working with this population. And I think I find, there's lots of interesting research about generations and Gen Zs, I really feel, are both fragile and fierce. And I think they're fierce in that they have navigated some crazy stuff, the pandemic, global politics, for our students, the Marshall Fire. And at the same time, like making a phone call can be terrifying for them. Talking to a new student in their class, making a study buddy can be incredibly overwhelming. So we've got this fascinating dialectic that we're really working with.
That's so interesting. They're so resilient, and yet there are some real challenges, which are probably new experiences that they're not used to doing.
Yeah, developmentally speaking, I would say what I've noticed the most is just the social comparison. It is a healthy thing for humans at this age, either adolescents or young adult, to compare themselves to their peers. And so that in itself is not a bad thing, but I think it is sort of excessive these days with social media. And if someone stays on social media too much and doesn't, interact with the actual people around them, it could be really hard to get a good grasp of what's actually going on with other people. Does everyone have it together? Is it just me that's struggling right now? It can be really difficult. And also, there isn't as much external validation in college, at least as much as there was in high school. And that's especially true in graduate school as well. And so it can be really hard for people to kind of know where they stand. And so that's something also that I've worked a lot with in my sessions with my clients, is just sort of like talking about what that social comparison looks like. I always tell them, you can't possibly be the only one struggling with this, because I have a good number of people who are seeing the exact same thing. And so can't tell you who they are, but you're definitely not the only one. And it can be good to kind of have that grounding.
Oh, that's so true. Because sometimes I think people assume that they are, right? Nobody's talking about it.
And certainly not posting about it. I think that's a, sort of a huge piece of it, is they see a very different narrative online.
Well, Colleen, we both are very involved in the ACT ACBS world. And, that saying, we compare our own insides to everybody else's outsides, and people always look really good on the surface, but we don't know.
Exactly.
We don't know what's going on inside. Yeah. So I really quickly, before we move on, I want to go back to this idea of the times that we're living in. And, we've mentioned the pandemic and the challenges of that. And of course, there's a lot happening politically. And I know the academic institutions have been directly involved with grant funding and foreign students and that type of thing. How is that trickling into people's lives? Are you seeing the impact of this current moment? Could you just say a couple words about that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. It's definitely showing up. I see it every day, right? How it's directly and indirectly impacting our students. I think of it in terms of like uncertainty, right? There's always uncertainty in life. But right now, in this kind of modern world, this uncertainty and this change is happening at a really rapid rate. And when students are kind of in this early stage of their psychological development, their career development, it can be really scary to know, okay, how is this going to impact me? How do I prepare for this uncertainty? What do I prepare for? What's outside of my control? What's within my control? And it just can feel really overwhelming. And so a lot of the work I do is thinking about, okay, how do we acknowledge the reality that there is a lot of uncertainty in this world right now? We don't know how it's going to impact you. We don't know if there's going to be a job for you when you graduate. We don't know if, what's going to happen with these international student policies. And how can you kind of orient yourself to still live a fulfilling life and tolerate that distress?
Maybe we need to have a whole separate episode on this topic, because I think as a therapist, I work more with middle-aged adults, and a lot of them, this is showing up in different ways in people's lives. And sometimes I find myself at a loss. Like I do a lot of what you're talking about. Like, okay, let's focus on what we can control and what can we do and what are your values here and how do we move forward? But sometimes I do feel at a loss. I'm like, I feel the same fear and uncertainty they do. And so, it's a tricky moment to be a therapist for sure.
I agree with you. It is a very tricky time, and it's sort of a weird time, but it's also in a lot of ways, I think, connecting. I can think of several moments in the past few months where there's a major headline. It wasn't just a headline, though. It had a direct impact on one of my clients. I met with them the next day, and the energy in the room is just different. We're connecting as humans who both don't know the answers and what's going to happen. And as a therapist, I've never had the answers. And I've always, told my clients, like, we're here to help you find your own answers. But in those moments, it's never more clear that I don't have the answers. And so I have to really access that humanness. And there have been sessions where we've just cried together. There's really sometimes no words. And I think in a way, like as hard as that is, sometimes it can be just really connecting.
In that regard, this reminds me of the pandemic where it's like, we're here together going through this. At least we have each other to talk about it with.
Yeah. I'm grateful you said that, Debbie, too. Like none of us really know that, because I think as therapists, we work really hard to sit in uncertainty, to sit in the unknowing and, the pain. And as a parent, as a dean, as a faculty chair, they aren't given that training and those resources. And they, the way higher ed is, the way the institutions have been around for a long time, they're used to being able to say, oh, we've lived through this. This is what we do. And so I think this is really something powerful to remember for those of you who are sitting in that, like, I know how to handle my kid's breakup. I don't know how to handle this. That is really validating that a lot of people are sitting in that.
This summer, I've started asking myself a question. Could I maybe have ADHD? It's a question that has come up more frequently as we've had guests on our podcast who have discussed this topic. The jury is still out on it and probably will be for a while longer, but I am consuming a lot of resources on the topic, and one podcast that I have been binging is ADHD Aha. And that was a long time before they actually became a sponsor of this show. Every episode, ADHD Aha has a guest on who talks about the moment they realized that they have ADHD, how it showed up for them, and how they adjusted to it. In an episode with Jesse Anderson, for example, that I listened to this morning, he talks about the difference between importance-based task management and interest-based task management. And I thought, wait, that's me. So for someone like me who only has a surface understanding of what ADHD actually is about, this is incredibly interesting and useful. To listen to ADHD Aha, search for ADHD Aha in your podcast app. That's ADHD Aha with Aha spelled AHA. And an exclamation point at the end, because it's really that good.
If you're shopping while working, eating, or even listening to this podcast, then you know and love the thrill of a deal. But are you getting the deal and cash back? Rakuten shoppers do. They get the brands they love, savings, and cash back. And you can get it too. Start getting cash back at your favorite stores like Target, Sephora, and even Expedia. Stack sales on top of cash back and feel what it's like to know you're maximizing the savings. It's easy to use, and you get your cash back sent to you through PayPal or check. The idea is simple. Stores pay Rakuten for sending them shoppers, and Rakuten shares the money with you as cash back. Download the free Rakuten app or go to Rakuten.com to start saving today. It's the most rewarding way to shop. That's RAKUTEN, Rakuten.com.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, I know that you all work with this embedded program at CU, and I think a lot of universities have programs like this where, mental health clinicians are hired directly to work in a department. That's my understanding of this program that you're all involved in, right?
Yep.
Do you work with professors too? I know you work with undergraduates and graduates. Do you also work with the faculty, or is it just students?
We don't see them clinically, so we don't offer therapy for staff and faculty, but we do offer trainings and consultations. So helping them feel more confident to support student mental health that shows up in the classroom. So really kind of supporting them through that academic lens.
Oh, great. Okay. And because I can think of other people I've known who have worked with faculty in certain departments, but that must be a different, like there can be providing clinical services to faculty.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's a different thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I was wondering, Colleen, actually, if you could talk about like, what is the advantage of having people directly in a department like that over just the main college counseling center?
Well, I think we have really established such a better understanding of what the current needs are, for the students and for the faculty and staff. It's a direct line of communication, and we'll do office hours where they can come and talk to us about students they have concerns about. And so I think it really increases our awareness of what's going on within each individual college. I think it also goes back to what we were talking about earlier and really recognizing when a clinical intervention intervention is needed and when some compassionate listening is needed. And so really helping to educate and support and encourage them to have some of the harder conversations that are not out of their scope. We're not asking them to be therapists. We're asking them to be, sort of human in the way that they're sitting with their students. And so always with the focus and lens of academic success. But for a lot of students, they aren't going to come to us for the first line. They're going to go to their TA. They're going to go to their professor, their academic advisor, their academic coach. And so giving them some tools has been really helpful.
I've heard from a number of my friends and colleagues who are professors that they're getting more and more of that over the year. People who have been in the academic world for a long time are saying more and more they're not just teaching the students the content of their course, they're also plugged into their mental health concerns more. They're coming to their professors or it's showing up in their academic work. Have you seen that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So they have to know what to do because their hands are in this.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say if you talk to some of the people who have been teaching for decades, they'll tell you how dramatically different it's become. And the universities are also paying attention to that. There's something called the Okanagan Charter that CU has signed up for. It's an initiative across campuses across the country to really make wellness and mental health a community concern, and really get everybody involved and educated. So it's shifting across everywhere.
Yeah. One thing I want to add is it's sort of like a type of cultural competency to be able to understand the college you work in. We all work in different colleges, except for Audrey and I were the only two that have the same college, but they all have different personalities. They all have different needs and different challenges. And it takes a while for us to really learn what those are. And so a great part of it is working with staff and faculty and partnering with them on different projects and initiatives. But I also feel like all of this helps me in the therapy room as well with my individual clients because I'm able to understand the culture of engineering as best as I can without being an engineer, which I think builds a lot of trust in my sessions.
Actually, I could not have asked for a better segue because I do want to start talking to the two of you, Audrey and Alison, about your book. Again, it's called Decompile Your Mind, An Engineer's Guide to Thoughts and Emotions, because this is a book that is specifically, it's a mental health book. It's very much evidence-based, therapy practices and ideas from psychology research, and it's tailored toward your specific group of engineers and engineering students. And first of all, I just kind of want to get back to that cultural piece that you mentioned, Alison, because I remember hearing, I can't remember, it was probably 5 or 10 years ago, there was a number of really sad cases I was reading in the news about suicide in engineering departments, which is just so heartbreaking. What's your understanding of that? Like, what are some of the unique challenges specifically in that type of department?
Well, this is a very important and, as you may imagine, very sensitive and also complicated question. There's a lot of factors that go into, how the culture can impact suicidal ideation, but also not even just the culture, right? There's a lot of things going on there. But speaking to the culture, it is a very high pressured environment. I'm not sure I can overstate that. I thought I understood having an engineering husband. I thought I understood how hard the classes can be and the rigor of everything, the exams, all that goes with it. And it is just extremely difficult. And not only that, but also extremely competitive. A lot of students find themselves feeling a little isolated because they're put in a position where they have to kind of compete for internships against their peers. No one's exactly forthcoming right away, at least, about the struggles that they're going through with their friends. It can be really vulnerable in this environment, which values, being stressed and not sleeping. Those are seen as positive things in a way. Sometimes it can be really challenging to communicate to a friend, hey, I'm actually really struggling and not in the, this is good kind of way. And also a lot of engineers I've noticed, and this is certainly true for other fields as well, but in engineering, a lot of engineers over-identify with the profession. It really becomes very personal when they're not able to complete a project as well as they'd like to. Research becomes really personal. Any failure really feels like a major hit. They care about this so much. A lot of them for years have been told, hey, you are very smart. You're going places. You got this. And people around them kind of take for granted that intelligence, that it just comes naturally to them, that they don't need to work for it. And so when they have to start to work for it, because college is clearly more difficult than high school, they start to really question themselves. And that can be a scary place to be. I will say, regarding the research out there on this, there are some studies that show that, there are higher levels of anxiety and depression among this population compared to other majors, but there doesn't seem to be like a clear consensus on that. But one thing that is clear is that this is a population that, despite the levels of anxiety and depression, whatever is going on, they're not the people to really reach out for mental health help quite as much, which, there could be a ton of reasons for that. But I think one of them is there is a stigma around it. And I do think, though, that we're in a place right now where that's starting to change. And that's been really cool to see. A lot of professors at our university are very open to, bringing mental health topics into the classroom. And it is starting to change a bit, but we're not quite there yet.
I'm so glad it's changing and that people like you are doing work directly to help and support people.
Well, I just wanted to add on to kind of emphasize that culture, right? In engineering, there is a culture of valuing confidence and competence and independence and stoicism, right? And so there's kind of this if I am struggling, if there's a problem in my life, I need to persevere to figure it out. And I don't need to ask for help because I am confident and independent and so I think in a lot of ways that serves them really well, especially in their engineering work. But it's hard sometimes to slow the brakes on that and recognize, hey, this is actually when I do need to reach outside of myself and ask for help.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. In your book, you use a metaphor that I think is really helpful here that will probably resonate not just to engineers, but to other people as well, which is decompiling your thoughts and emotions to kind of almost look at the code behind the scenes of the programming that's going on to try to help people maybe have a better understanding of their thoughts and emotions, right? So why do you think that understanding our thoughts and emotions in this way can be beneficial to people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this isn't a lot of information that we get organically. So I think it's important because many people, when they have a distressing thought or emotion, they have this urge to maybe push it away. It's distressing. It's uncomfortable. And sometimes they can interpret that as, oh, this is an error. This is a flaw. This is a bug in the system, using that analogy. But the truth is, things like anxiety and fear and intrusive thoughts and rumination, those are all very uncomfortable, but they are all signs that our brain is working the way it is designed to work. Now, granted, there, are certain cases where maybe there is some pathology in that if it's happening all the time and impacting your life. And that's not what I'm really talking about here. I'm just talking about feeling anxious. Before this podcast recording, I was feeling anxious. And if I saw that as a huge mistake or thing that I had to get rid of, I might just not sign on to have this conversation. I would just try to get rid of it. And so understanding that you can have these uncomfortable feelings and thoughts and still do the things you care about in life and want to do, that can be really powerful. And so it can also help you learn how to regulate and work with those things instead of against them, because then your life sort of becomes about avoidance and trying to dodge all of the distressing thoughts and emotions that you have. And that's truly exhausting. It kind of, you kind of lose the plot at that point.
And I think, right, it's not just thoughts and emotions aren't just things to tolerate, even though we do have to tolerate them sometimes. Those are our body's ways to try to tell us what we're needing and what we care about, right? And so how do you kind of, to use the term, like decompile those thoughts and emotions to really understand what is underlying that thought or emotion, right? What's the underlying need that's present? What's the underlying value that's present? And so rather than kind of reactively responding to the anxiety by saying, oh, I'm nervous to show up, I'm just not going to show up, right? Kind of decompiling it to say, okay, what's the underlying need and value? And to say, hey, this anxiety is actually showing up to tell me I really care about this. And even though it's hard, I still want to do it because that anxiety is actually telling me what I care about.
That was one of the things I really loved about your book is it doesn't just demystify what's happening in our thoughts and emotions and normalize it, but it's also like a way to tap into the wisdom of your thoughts and emotions and to use those to your advantage. And you go into so many different ways of doing that throughout your book.
I feel like there is this subtle, beautiful energy that Alison and Audrey have with their clients that is infused in that book. And there were so many times that I would read it and be like, oh, I feel so much better and I know better and I do this work. And yet there's something really amazing about that validation, exactly what you're talking about. Like this is a huge part of being a human, and there's value and there's depth and there's wisdom in there.
Well, and you even go into a part where you basically write about each emotion and like what might that be telling you and what need might that be signaling here. And that's like, that chart is so helpful. It's worth its weight in gold because I'm like, oh yeah, sometimes, when you feel an intense emotion, it just feels overwhelming and it's hard to make sense of it. But to actually say, oh, I'm feeling this and maybe it means that. I mean, that's a really helpful skill, I think, for people. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned that this book can be helpful to non-engineers. I couldn't agree more. If you are a person who likes charts and is, very logical. Yep. Yeah. This book is for you.
So one of the things in your book that you point out is that some of those skills that engineers really have, like the problem solving skills and the logic and that sort of intellectual thinking that serves them so well academically and in engineering projects and that kind of thing, sometimes it doesn't quite work when it comes to our emotional suffering. Could you talk a little bit about that? Like, why can't we just logic our way out of our emotions here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish, a lot of times I'll sit with students and I'll say, yeah, I wish we could logic our way out of this too. I also wish that could be possible. But I think engineers are trained to be problem solvers, right? They're trained to persevere in really complex situations, to think deeply, to think logically. And like you mentioned, that works so well in that engineering context where there's a concrete problem to be solved and concrete solutions that they can find. Unfortunately, in the world of the mind, concrete solutions are not always possible. Sometimes they are, right? Sometimes like there could be a concrete solution of, hey, maybe I just need to exercise more and maybe that would help my mood. And in those cases, definitely go for it. But there's other ways, right, where there's just not a concrete solution. And I know you and Colleen both specialize in ACT, right? Acceptance and commitment therapy. And a big piece of ACT is accepting that pain and distress is part of the human experience. And the more we fight that pain and distress, the bigger it gets, right? And so helping engineers discern when is that problem solving really helpful and use those skills to really kind of set yourself up for success. And when is that problem solving and that perseverance taking you down kind of a rabbit hole that's really just amplifying the stress, right? Sometimes with anxiety, I think we keep using that example, or sadness, right? That sometimes is going to happen, right? Like our bodies are going to feel those emotions. And so rather than kind of feeling them and letting them pass and moving on, if we fight them or try to problem solve them, we can really get stuck in them. And it can kind of limit our ability to actually move through it because we keep ruminating on the problem solving and it keeps bringing us back to the emotion versus just kind of letting our body process the emotion the way that it's kind of wired to do so.
Yeah, you have a whole section of your book about those kind of layering on of the extra emotions that make the situation worse when we fight it. And I love that you use the beach ball metaphor. Do you remember that? Because I've used that before with clients sometimes. Do one of you want to describe the beach ball metaphor?
Audrey does.
Oh. Yeah.
So I
think I think like, we probably all can kind of think of a time where we were at a pool or at the beach, and you think of those big blow up balls, and you kind of play with them, you kind of bounce, you can kind of push them so they kind of go under the water. And it's possible to hold them under the water, right? But as soon as you get distracted or kind of lose focus, the ball slips up. And so we often think about kind of suppressing emotions or trying to get rid of emotions, kind of similar to pushing the beach ball under the water, right? It works, so we can definitely do that, but it takes a ton of energy and focus to keep it under the water. And so as soon as maybe, your friends join you at the beach, or there's a snack, or there's a volleyball game, right? You have to choose, right? Do you want to kind of stay and keep the ball pressed into the water, or do you want to engage in these other activities? And we kind of are saying, the beach ball itself is not the problem, right? It's okay if the beach ball is floating on the water, right? What is more distressing is the effort that it takes to keep the beach ball down, and how that takes away from you engaging in life the way that you want to engage in life.
I wish I would have known about this concept. This is one of those things you learn when you study psychology for years and years that I wish I could have told my 18-year-old self, because going back to college, because of the amount of time and effort I spent trying to push my own emotions and my own thoughts down. So again, you go into so many different strategies. Also, we've talked a lot about emotions today, but you also give some strategies for, coping with some thinking patterns like self-criticism and rumination and worry and that kind of thing. So it's all really helpful. And you have a whole chapter on the imposter phenomenon, which we've talked about a lot on the podcast. My co-host Jill Stoddard has a whole book on imposterism. And I just think for me, my own sense of imposter phenomenon was peak in graduate school, probably undergraduate too, but for me, it peaked really in graduate school. You must see it a lot in your work. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a whole chapter on it. Is that true? Is this a pretty common thing in your world?
It is extremely common. Yes, a very large portion of our clients struggle with this, and that's absolutely why we included it in the book. One thing that comes to my mind is that engineers are really high achievers, and the imposter phenomenon can be experienced by anybody, but it is pretty common in high achievers, and also common in people who are doing things outside of their comfort zone, really hard things. And so learning engineering concepts and working, their way through undergrad and grad school, if you are one to experience the imposter phenomenon, which 70% of people do at some point in their life, it really is inevitable if you're putting yourself in an environment where you're challenging yourself. But yeah, I don't know if Audrey, you want to speak to that anymore.
Well, I go back to what you mentioned earlier, right? Comparing your insides to other people's outsides, right? And I think in engineering, I think it happens everywhere, but I think in engineering in particular, because there is this culture of wanting to be the smartest, wanting to be competent, wanting to kind of have all the answers. And any sense of confusion or uncertainty or doubt is kind of opposite of what the engineering identity stands for, right? And so there's this kind of pattern where everyone is kind of hiding their doubt, their confusion, their uncertainty, but then they're amplifying their confidence and their knowledge. And so, as an individual, right, you might be comparing your insides of, I don't know if I fit in, I don't know if I belong, to what people are showing on the outside. And I think that culture of really kind of wanting to exhibit competence and confidence can really exacerbate it, because there's not space for that confusion, or that's not really normalized or kind of socially accepted.
I have told the story on the podcast before in an episode we did years ago of how I was really pretty convinced that I got into graduate school for my PhD program on a like a fluke or something until the day I went to this imposter syndrome. They used to call it imposter syndrome back then, until they realized most people have it. And it was a packed lecture hall at Harvard with hundreds of people. And I was like, oh my gosh, all these people think the same. We all think this. It was eye-opening to me. So in your chapter, why do you make the case against confidence? I love this. What's the problem with confidence, and why should we not be aiming for that necessarily?
Yeah, so in that chapter, we talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect, which essentially describes the trajectory of one's confidence as they learn and gain competence. So there is a visual for this, so I encourage listeners to look this up because it is pretty interesting. But yeah, the idea is when you're learning something, as your competence grows, your confidence grows as well, and it's a pretty steep incline. And there, you reach this peak in our book. We call it the peak of enthusiasm, where you're feeling great. You feel like you understand it. You understand the material and how to apply it, and you're on top of the world. And then you start to learn more about it, and you start to learn the ins and outs of it. You're learning things about it that get to the root of the entire subject. You're not just learning surface level things anymore. You're really digging deep, which happens in college, right? And especially grad school. So your confidence starts to decline, and you reach the valley of despair. You reach this point where your competence is still growing while your confidence is suffering. You are technically more competent than you were before. You don't know any less, but it kind of feels that way in a way. It's really uncomfortable. If you can get through that valley of despair, your confidence can start to go back up. Once you're able to really work through, like, okay, like, I am going to trust the process. I have a grasp on this. And then eventually it reaches a level where it's sustainable. And lately I've been thinking about this a lot, actually, because I grew up playing the drums, like a drum set. I was self-taught. I did it by instinct and ear. I honestly wasn't half bad. I joined a band. We did pretty well. And it was a lot of fun. But kind of more recently in my life, I decided to start playing again. It's been like a decade since the last time I owned a drum set. I recently got one, and I decided to learn the rudiments. And I don't know if you're familiar with drum rudiments, but it's a lot of working out both hands and making sure your technique is good. And you got to find the fulcrum on the stick and make sure you're holding it in the exact right spot to make sure it bounces up. And the point of it is really to work on a lot of things, but actually a big part of it is the weak hand. You're literally trying to work on your weak hand, which does not feel good. And so I am in the valley of despair right now. And it is really hard because I see myself as a drummer. And then now I'm like, oh, shoot, like I really feel uncomfortable. I don't feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I'm taking drum lessons and it feels not so great, but I keep reminding myself, like that this is exactly why I wanted to go back and learn this, is because I reached a point where I was stuck. I had my own patterns with my drumming. I wasn't coming up with anything new. This is the only way to get past that, and to learn more means to feel uncomfortable, because I actually want to get better. And so I can give updates later on how it's going. But right now, yeah, the despair is there for me.
Oh, such a good example. You start to realize how much you don't know. And
Yes.
that's a little demoralizing, but you have to move through that to get the actual competence. And if you have the choice between the two, I'd rather have the competence than be like, oh, I'm so great at this, even if I am not. It's
Exactly.
like that false. Yeah. Well, this is such a rich conversation. I could talk to you for so long, but I actually want to move into the last few minutes here. Just some tips for our college students and future college students. Actually, my niece, who I adore, is starting college this fall, and it's so exciting, and she's nervous. And then my nephew will be the year after that. So my sister will be having the empty nest, which will be a whole other we'll have to have a whole other podcast episode on that for her. But I wonder for people like my niece Abby and my nephew Riley who are starting college or in college, what tips can you offer for people to really support their own mental health as they are in the academic student world? I wonder if maybe each of you could give a few tips.
Yeah, I'll start having, this fall, I'll have two in college. I'll have a senior and a freshman. So I feel like I've been through this. And then I also look at it in the lens of one of my positions is embedded in our program in exploratory studies, which is the first year experience. So I feel like I see a lot of the ramifications of this.
Oh, this is personal and professional for you,
This
Colleen.
is personal and professional. I will own that. Yes. I would start with really navigating expectations. And this is the personal part. I think in our society, especially in the privileged world of society, there's a lot of pressure to go on all these tours and to visit all these colleges. And there's books written on it. There's websites written on, the different colleges and what they can offer you. And students feel this immense pressure to pick the perfect college experience. And we kind of set them up for that. How does this feel? How does this feel? Do you think this is going to be the right one? And we invest a lot of time and energy and money. And then they get to college and college is new and hard and different. And it's supposed to be uncomfortable. I mean, some people say the first is the worst. In that first year, there's a lot of things that you're navigating. And going back to what they were saying, in the engineering world across the campus, they wonder if they've made the wrong mistake or they have messed up or they're not doing the right thing. And so I think really managing the expectations that you can have a wonderful and amazing college experience and it's going to be hard. And that, you will probably we expect you to feel lonely in those first, couple of months. And that doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It means that you're actually showing up and being human and that, being able to ask for support is a life skill and not a crutch. And I think, really being able to, sit with this both and it's both a wonderful experience and it's really difficult. I think when we manage those expectations, I think we can really set them up for success.
Oh, that is so wise. I love that. And this perfectionism, like this is supposed to be this perfect fit for us. It's like, that is just not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to follow up on that. I think the thing that I would add is just, when you do make mistakes, when things are hard, how do you just give yourself so much self-compassion and kindness and just remind yourself that this is part of the experience and, you can be really kind to yourself even if you feel like you messed up and just really kind of expecting that mess up. And then how do you kind of soothe yourself and take care of yourself when you do kind of feel overwhelmed.
I love that. Self-compassion.
Yep.
Yes. How about you, Alison?
Oh boy. I feel like they both had great answers. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, to keep it pretty simple, make mistakes, fail, seek support when you need it, and know the resources on campus that are available to you because there are a lot of the time. And not all the students really take advantage of it, but there's a lot out there, and including the counseling centers. So yeah.
Support.
Yeah.
Yes.
And making it personal again to any parent that's listening to this, really, I think recognizing our expectations as a parent, if our kid calls home and they're unhappy and how that makes us feel and what we do and our expectations. So there's something called the W theory for first year integration, and it's taken from the literature on moving through different cultures. So they really, highlight sort of the culture of college. And I was sort of shocked when I read about it because we are taught to expect a U, where they go off and it's hard and they're homesick. But by the time they come home from winter break, they're really excited and they've got it and they're ready for the spring semester. But it's actually a W. There's another dip. And that's really surprising when parents send their kid back after a winter break, which can be fairly long, and they're surprised that they're homesick again. And they're realizing, they were home and they got all of that caregiving. And now it's uncomfortable again, and recognizing that that's the W, that it comes through, and that the true integration takes the whole year.
Oh, that's really good to know. I didn't know that either. That's so interesting. Okay, Colleen, since we have an insomnia expert here also, I feel like I want to just ask if you have any sleep tips for our college students, because isn't sleep, I mean, I remember being up all night in college sometimes. What would you recommend in terms of keeping that sleep in check?
It's kind of like going to the dining hall and eating all the cereal. I remember thinking I could definitely learn an entire class and, a couple of all-nighters. So I think it goes back to that, remembering that they're going to make mistakes. What I think is fascinating about this generation, and if you have anyone in this age group, you know what I'm talking about, their education around nutrition and sleep is phenomenal. We did not know any of that. They've got their macros, they're talking about their protein, and they know that sleep matters. And some of that is I think, the benefit of social media, where they can hear about that. So we're at a different point where it's not like we need to educate them on the value, but I think it really lands with especially that engineering population, that there's this deep ambivalence. So really, I guess we could say this is true of substances and eating, as well. I mean, we've educated all of our kids about the dangers of binge drinking, but that doesn't mean that they aren't going to go to a party and do that. And so we're really balancing this relationship with having our first mistakes or learning by living. And so I think with sleep, it's been so interesting because we do have a lot of preventative outreach on campus where they talk about the value of sleep. And I know they're listening and they know that I know that they know it, but it doesn't make them change their behavior. So we're really trying to find this place where they've had some, air quote failures, but that they've not fallen into this epic pattern where they're really in trouble. And so I think, the best advice is really getting them to start very small and do very few things. So one of the studies that has actually gotten a lot of the college students' attention is the one that they did at Stanford with the athletes and how it improved their capacity, both cognitively, academically, and I think it was on the basketball court. They didn't ask for a full shift. They asked them to increase their sleep window for a couple of weeks. And I think that is such a great strategy, because if you say, you've got to change everything, you're going to miss your parties, you're going to miss the late nights where people are bonding, they shut down and they don't do anything. But if you get in there and say, how about, for a couple of weeks, we open up that sleep window and just give more opportunity, unless they've got a true chronic insomnia issue, I really think that that's a great way to get a little bit of traction, because they know that they're going to feel better and they know they're going to study harder and do better academically. We don't have to, it's good to remind them of that, but really just getting a little bit of behavioral change that way.
I feel like there's so much you have to learn by experience. So it's like, try sleeping a lot for 2 weeks and see how you feel. Because I feel like I had to do that. I had to suffer through many a very tired day after not sleeping enough to really sink in. Yeah. And I still don't always remember that. So, trial and error. Well, again, it's been such a pleasure. I just love talking to the three of you about this. And I feel like we could go on all day, but we will end here. And hopefully we have provided some food for thought for everyone out there who, again, whether you're a college student or a graduate student yourself, or and love one, or you work with college students in any capacity, I hope there's something helpful here. It was a real delight talking to the three of you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for talking about this important topic.
Well, thank you. Hopefully it will do some good in the world to have this conversation out there. So listeners, be sure to share it with people who think would enjoy listening to this conversation. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to that episode. I'm with Jill. We're going to talk a little bit about what we just heard. And I'll start by saying that this conversation was a lot deeper and more philosophical than I expected, because when I agreed to do this interview, I thought, okay, we'll have mental health tips for people going into college, but they really got into a lot of complex and really interesting cultural stuff, including some expectations we get into around what college is supposed to be like.
Yeah, absolutely. It sort of reminded me of so many stages where people with the best intentions make comments like, enjoy every minute. They say that when you have a baby, and meanwhile, you're like tearing your hair out because it's so hard. They say that when you go to college and you're like, oh my God, yeah, it's fun, but it's also really hard. And what I loved is how they really focused on the both and thinking, right? And we actually did an episode, it's episode 303, that's called Both and Thinking that Yael did with Marianne Lewis. And I just loved that focus. It's like, it reminded me, in ACT, how we talk about like kicking butt or changing butt to and. Like if a student were to say, well, college is really fun, but it's super hard and I'm not doing well as I wanted to. Using that but, it's like one negates the other. Whereas if you change that to an and, college is really fun and I'm struggling and it's difficult. And it's such a quick and easy intervention, but I think it could be incredibly powerful for so many different things. And this conversation they were having about acknowledging both sides of that, I think can also be applied. It's such a great life lesson because it can be applied to so many things in life. These college kids are going to graduate and live lives and they're going to get married and it's going to be both hard and wonderful. And maybe they'll have kids and it'll be both hard and wonderful. It's just so true of so many things that we go through, but we live in this like positive, what do you call it? Toxic positivity culture that makes us believe we're supposed to be like happy and think everything's wonderful all the time. And then we struggle when that's not the reality.
Yeah. And I think thinking of it in this both and way lends itself more to a more compassionate point of view toward yourself. Like, yeah, this is hard. And there's hard moments. Right. And sometimes I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And I feel like I'm struggling socially or emotionally versus, oh, this is supposed to be the best time in my life. What's wrong with me that this is hard? There's just a very different way you can talk to yourself when you take that stance.
Well, and like most of the stuff I do, whether I'm speaking or writing or whatever, is really based on this notion that something being hard or painful is not a sign that something is wrong and you need to run away. Like oftentimes it's a sign you're exactly where you're meant to be because it typically means this is something that matters to you, right? And when we're doing something that's challenging, that matters to us, then of course we're going to have some feelings of insecurity or anxiety or self-doubt. And I really loved too, when you guys were talking about the whole imposter phenomenon, that they were saying like, yeah, this is inevitable when you're challenging yourself. And I was just so tickled to hear that because that is not the tack that you hear out in the world, right? Normally what you hear is, here's 5 tips to build your confidence and your self-esteem so you don't have to feel this way anymore. When in reality, if you're doing something challenging that you care about doing well, you're likely going to have these challenging thoughts and feelings. And that's normal. And it's just a sign that you care and you need to keep going.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear from the author of Imposter No More, who is the expert on this topic. And I love that shift of how you look at it. And your work, Jill, has been really incredible for this. And so if anyone's listening who's either in college or knows someone who's struggling with that, like I think that this is just a very normal thing. And you can take a look at Jill's book.
Thanks, Debbie.
As a remedy. Yeah.
My hype woman.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's so on point for this because this is just people are stretching themselves, they're challenging themselves, they're, doing exams and papers and all these things. Right. So, yeah.
And doing it like independently for the first time.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So there may be that feeling of like a little bit kind of dealing with this out on an island. And people don't want to like confess that they feel like imposters because they feel like then they're admitting that they're imposters and everyone will now know. And so it can be something that people struggle with alone. But, as soon as you start admitting it, you don't hear people say, well, you're a fraud, get out of here. They go, oh my gosh, me too.
Yeah.
Right. Just like you told the story about going to that lecture on imposter syndrome and the place was packed because everybody else was feeling it too.
It was like standing room only. And I could not believe, that had a bigger impact on me than the content was the fact that hundreds of people were there.
Yeah.
And I thought I was really the only
important.
one.
Yes. Yeah. And that, to me, that is the message. It's like, we all just need to talk about it more and then it will have a lot less power. So I was really appreciative of that part of the conversation for sure.
All right. Well, thanks again for listening, everybody. And good luck, everyone, in college and beyond with your mental health.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can now listen to our podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on our website or go to patreon.com/offtheclocksite.
If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review and sharing this episode with a friend or an enemy who would enjoy it.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our fabulous newsletter on Substack. Or if you're still addicted to social media, find us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
We'd like to thank our rockstar production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
Now for the boring part. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.